Thank you again for joining us on this Monday. We look at the situation and we see, on the one hand, very, very good news on the heroic release of two hostages yesterday in the heart of Rafah. But on the other hand, of course, the devastating news of more soldiers killed, increasing pressure on Israel as we begin inching towards the end zone of this war, hopefully in the south, and very important questions about the relationship with Egypt, the United States, and the future moves that are necessary to defeat Hamas. I just wanted to mention that ELNET is pushing forward very, very aggressively. We have a delegation on the ground today from Spain, Austria, Slovenia, Denmark, Romania, France, Italy, and the UK, all on the ground in the south to see the devastation with their own eyes. So we're continuing to push. This is our 18th delegation since October 7th. We're approaching 200 European leaders that have been with us in these 4 short months, very intensive months, and we'll continue with a crescendo towards the end of February with 4 delegations at the same time from 6 countries, including the United States, the 3 Baltics, Germany, and France, all on the ground at the same time as we continue the push to make sure that European leaders are fully educated and members of parliament are fully behind this effort, which is absolutely necessary for the future of Israel. So without further ado, it is my honor to call on Emmanuel Navon, Dr. Navon, who is the CEO of ELNET Israel, where it all happens. Emmanuel, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and welcome to everyone, especially to our speaker, Hussein Mansour. I'm very glad and honored to be presenting today, for those of you who are in the US, and I will have to end exactly on time because, as David said, we have a delegation on the ground here in Israel, and I'm supposed to address them exactly at 8 p.m. Israel time. So Hussein Aboubakr Mansour, he's the director of the Endowment for Middle East Truth program for emerging democratic voices from the Middle East. Hussein was born in Cairo, Egypt, into a family who raised another son to be an imam, inspiring young people to become jihadists. His critical intellect led him to find out more about Israel and Jews and to forge friendships with Israelis. Hussein received a political asylum in the United States under President Barack Obama in 2012 and worked as an instructor for language and culture at the Defense Language Institute at Monterey, California. He then went on to work as an educator and public speaker for Stand With Us, educating students about cultural and geopolitical issues in the Middle East and helping them counter anti-Semitism. Hussein wrote an autobiography, Minority of One, The Unchaining of the Arab Mind, and his articles have appeared in Commentary, Newsweek, the Jewish Journal, JNS News, Times of Israel, and Mosaic. So Hussein, thank you for joining us, and I should add to this that I had the honor and the pleasure to meeting him personally in Washington, D.C. This last summer, and it's always very inspiring to talk to you and to hear you. And so since we have you here with us today, Hussein, as you know, we are in that war, and there are many developments on the ground. And since you were born and you grew up in Egypt, I think it's important for us to understand your perspective on Egypt's role and the way it perceives the conflict, because obviously Egypt is one of the key players in the Middle East. It's not only the largest Arab country, it also has a border with the Gaza Strip. In fact, it used to rule the Gaza Strip between 1949 and 1967. It seems less interested in it today, like many other countries in the region. I don't know of any country that would be interested, but there's, of course, as Israel is moving its military operations towards the south of the Gaza Strip and Rafah, and there's a lot of concern in Egypt about this, and the fear, I guess, of being perceived as kind of a traitor in the Arab world if they let the Palestinian or the residents of Gaza, leaving the Gaza Strip for the for the Sinai Peninsula, that would be, like, I guess in Egypt, that would be perceived as, being responsible for another Nakba or something like this. So can you explain to us exactly, maybe, Hussein, how does Egypt perceive Gaza? How does that perceive the conflict? Ideally, you're allowed to talk, now you're free to talk, but, obviously, if you were still in Egypt, you wouldn't be able to tell us exactly what does President al-Sisi really want or think. But, now you're a free man, so you can tell us.
Thank you. Thank you, Manuel. Thank you for having me. Today's a great pleasure to speak to you. Gaza, as you yourself noted, Egypt has a long history with the Gaza Strip, and Gaza has always been considered for Egypt its soft underbelly. There have always been security concerns about Gaza, especially since the rise of the government of Hamas in Gaza in 2007. We're talking about an area with borders that is shared with Israel, which has very complicated security arrangements in Egypt and under the umbrella of the Camp David Accords and the peace treaty between both countries. Egypt always try to manage this border situation between the Palestinians, especially after the rise of Hamas, and Israel, in a way that does not jeopardize its peace agreement with Israel, but also does not jeopardize Egypt's security. This became even more so with the Arab Spring. With the Arab Spring, actually, Gaza has been one of the main areas in which there has been some collusion between Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood inside Egypt. I think a lot of the details remain hazy, but we've seen border clashes between the Egyptian military and Hamas starting from 2011. You had, of course, a series of bombings of the gas lines that at the time moved the gas from Egypt to Israel. You had various terrorist activities. Later, this will be culminated with the rise of ISIS in the Sinai, which Egypt always suspected Hamas of aiding some way or the other through also their very complex tunnel system with terrorism in the Sinai Peninsula. This also became even more pronounced of a security concern and animosity after the ousting of the Muslim Brotherhood government in Egypt, which was seen as an ally to Hamas in Gaza by the now sitting president Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. All of this as for a very complex relationship between both, but still, Egypt wants to see Hamas at least in control of Gaza, not because they like Hamas, but because they are afraid of the alternatives. They see it as a very volatile situation. They've already been having for years a lot of problems with groups like ISIS in the Sinai. Having Hamas on the other side at least means that there is somebody to talk to. If not directly with Hamas, you can talk to the Qataris, as everybody has been doing. So Gaza has always been a headache for Egypt, I would say, sometimes even more so for Egypt than it is for Israel. Because in order to maneuver all of this, Egypt had to constantly manage also not just the border situation, not just the relationship with Israel, not just the security conditions, not just the relationship with Hamas, but as you yourself alluded to, they have to manage public perception. They have to manage public discontent. They cannot be perceived publicly as someone who's aiding Israel, whether in the blockade against Hamas or in trying to undermine Hamas's power in Gaza, or even, especially right now, they do not at any cost want to be seen as an aid to Israel in its quest to destroy Hamas altogether. This is, I would say, is the Egyptian regime's number one priority, given the, of course, the salience of the Palestinian cause in amongst a lot of segments of the Egyptian public and the public at large in many Arab countries in the Middle East. But even more so now, given the fact that Egypt has been going through dire economic conditions for the past 2 years or so, the Egyptian pound went through various cycles of devaluation in the last, I would say, 16 months. It lost something like 100% of its value. Actually, right now we're looking at another devaluation that's actually, I think it's coming any moment, which will also be a major disruption for the Egyptian economy. All of these economic difficulties have actually caused a lot of public discontent against the government of Sisi in the last year, and they started to become very pronounced during October 7th, and that's actually the first time since the rise of Sisi to power in 2013 that you do have these strong feelings of public discontent because of economic performance. After October 7th, we saw in Egypt for the first time since the Arab Spring, or since really 2013, mass protests to support the Palestinians against the Israelis. Now, this, of course, must have been deeply alarming for the Egyptian regime. They tried to come ahead of the curve by organizing their own protests, which were supposedly pro-Palestinian, anti-Israeli protests, but then basically they were pro-Sisi protests. So they just held pictures of Sisi and tried to kind of convert the momentum into support for the Egyptian state. So I would say that till this very moment, managing public perceptions, especially as we're talking about another devaluation coming, is their number one priority. And I would say a lot of the statements of the Egyptian regime publicly, including the ones that we had last night about the Egypt suspending the Camp David Accords, which actually the Egyptian Foreign Ministry tried to climb down from this morning, saying that no, Egypt is committed for the Camp David. So I would say a lot of these statements as well should be seen possibly as an effort to manage that public discontent and public perception.
Thank you. That was very interesting. As you were talking about the cancellation, those so-called threats to cancel the Camp David agreement. Of course, those agreements are subsidized by the U.S. taxpayers, both towards Israel and Egypt. And I don't think that Egypt can afford to abandon the economic support of the United States. And you mentioned the dire strait of the Egyptian economy, which brings me to my next question, and then we'll get to other issues more related to our region. But Egypt, because of its very dire economic situation, has this dependency on the United States. The IMF owes a lot of money to the IMF. I don't remember if it's more or less than Argentina, but the two world records of owing money to the IMF are Egypt and Argentina. And do you see any possibility of al-Sisi playing China against the US, kind of threatening? Because we know that the Chinese, unlike the Russians, they are very deep coffers, and they would be happy, to offer economic help, as they do sometimes already, to Egypt. Do you think that al-Sisi could even bluff towards the US with kind of threatening to get more economic support from the Chinese, or maybe it wouldn't be bluff at all? Do you see any options like this?
That's a good question. Speaking of the IMF, there was also an Egyptian delegation to the IMF here in DC just a few weeks ago, talking about actually a new bailout for the regime. So that's also it's going to grow substantially as we go ahead in 2024. Egypt do not have the advantages that other Arab countries have in the region, like, for example, GCC countries that do have some maneuvering leg, in my opinion, in trying to maintain a special relationship with the United States, at the same time trying to advance their own interests in Russia and China. The Saudis have been very outspoken in this. The Emiratis definitely seem to be the ones who are going the fastest with this, with forging a special relationship with China. Now the Saudis, of course, have the They made it also contingent on the possibility of the normalization deal with Israel, the U.S. providing some sort of a security treaty or some sort of security agreement. So that the Gulf here, I think, has a room for maneuverability around the great power competitions. I'm not sure that Egypt has so, because Egypt is more dependent on the West. And moreover, I think actually the Gaza issue, and this is something that I didn't talk about in my last question, and this is one of the most pronounced Egyptian fears from the current ongoing war in Gaza. Gaza risks the overflowing of Palestinian refugees into a country that's already been receiving, since the war in Sudan, a very large number of Sudanese refugees. So this will put an immense economic pressure. I'm not here talking about the security aspect of this. I'm talking about just pure economics of it. This will be a major load that will be pushing an economy, a national economy that's already struggling to keep afloating in very difficult international conditions. You're talking about the decline, a major decline in the income from the Suez Canal due to the disruption of the shipping lanes because of the Houthis, and the decline of the tourism, the income from tourism due to the escalation of violence in the Middle East in general. So given all of these constraints, now you're talking about the possibility of Israel, and this is, I think, this is a fear that's haunting Egyptian officials whenever they see the Israelis are pushing even harder into the Gaza Strip, that ultimately they will be the one who will have to shoulder the burden of giving shelter to all of those Palestinian refugees, which they can't afford economically. In order for them to prevent this possibility, they have to keep close to the United States, at least at the moment. And I think we've seen this very clearly since the beginning of the war, not just the United States, even talking to European officials all the time about completely taking that possibility off the table. Of course, Israeli officials always talked about it as a possibility, whether in terms of letting the Palestinian civilians or Gazan civilians into the Sinai Peninsula as a temporary measure until the military campaign in the Strip is over, or talking about a long-term resettlement. Both specters, I think, are completely rejected and very strongly opposed by the Egyptian regime. In order for them to ensure that this is not happening, I would say they have to maintain their close relationship, their close coordination with the United States and with Europe. We've seen how they've been very involved in the negotiations, whether in facilitating the former pause in the fighting and the release of the hostages, or even right now the possibility of a new deal. So I don't foresee them being able to do that. Egypt has had long-standing relationships with Russia. I think they can always try to play with that a little bit. They do have very strong economic ties to China. China helped with building the Egyptian new capital just outside of Cairo. But I think leaving or trying to seriously gamble with a relationship with the United States, no matter what the difficulties in the relationship were, I think that would be something very difficult for the Egyptian regime to do.
Right. So thank you for that. You mentioned the relationship with Russia, and of course, the main reason why the Camp David agreements were signed in 1979 was precisely because it was a transactional agreement in which Egypt traded its alliance with the Soviet Union at the time was an alliance with the United States, and this is also what enabled the agreement. But I'd like to come back to the possible future role of Egypt in the Gaza Strip after the war, because of course, when we try to think about what we call here the day after, everybody thinks of Egypt as a natural candidate to be involved in a way, somewhere or the other, in the future management of the Gaza Strip. And I would say I was a bit surprised when you said that Egypt earlier when you spoke was kind of interested in some type of Hamas presence in the Gaza Strip, because I personally, and I think probably a lot of people, are under the impression that al-Sisi, I don't know how religious he is, but he must be praying a few times a day for Israel's victory against Hamas. Since Hamas is part of the Muslim Brotherhood, and since al-Sisi came to power after toppling a Muslim Brotherhood regime, why would he have any interest in Hamas keeping any control of the Gaza Strip? Like, why not the PA, for example? Why not, you know, a regime that would have more allegiance to Egypt itself, maybe to the UAE, and like, you know, let's say Turkey or Iran, for example.
No, I think that was definitely the case, more so before October 7th, when there were no real alternatives or obvious alternatives. So Hamas also, as I said, you had an Islamic insurgency in the Sinai that Hamas was expected to collaborate with. But of course, those who are familiar with the world of Islamist and jihadist politics, you do have sadly infinite shades of insanity, to which at one point you'll find Hamas preferable to other groups. So I think that was more so in the past. I think currently the signals that the Egyptian regime gave that they absolutely do not want any part in governing Gaza or providing security in Gaza after the war, at least if there is not some sort of a Israeli arrangement for negotiations or a Palestinian state. And this is what the Saudis said. This is actually what the Emiratis said. I think their UN ambassador just said the same thing again today, and they have been saying for quite some time that they basically using, I think Egypt, along with the other Arab countries, are using their participation in some sort of an arrangement for post-war Gaza as a leverage against Israel, or trying to use it as a leverage against Israel, whether to extract some concessions that have to do with the Palestinians, or concessions that have to do with something else entirely. But I think they are aware. I mean, I spoke to some Arab officials, and I kind of between the lines, I could see some. There is an awareness that Israel does not have a clear solution to post-war Gaza, and that gives, it gives the Arab states some cards to play and some leverage over this. Obviously, the Israelis would like to see Arabs involved. That will be a major easement on the Israelis trying to find a solution for a post-Hamas Gaza. So I think Egypt, just like the Saudis, just like the Emiratis, are trying to use this as some sort of leverage. Extracting what exactly, I don't know. I don't imagine. I mean, publicly, what's being said, for example, is a Palestinian state, that the Israelis have to start providing the basis for a Palestinian state. Privately, I don't think Arab officials are so delusional as to think that this is possibly at the moment. I think they are very aware of the problems of the Palestinian Authority. There was actually a meeting in Riyadh between Egyptian officials, Saudi officials, Jordanian officials, and the Palestinian Authority not too long ago. It was a secret meeting in which basically they told them, right now you have no options but to do some internal reform. You need political reform, you need economic reform, because that's the only way that there's a chance for you to get back into Gaza. And that tells me that there is an awareness of the difficulties of trying even to bring back the Palestinian Authority into Gaza, given the fact that the Palestinian Authority is unpopular, is very corrupt, all of the things that we know. So I think it's not a matter of preference. I think the Arabs also are in a similar situation to Israel. That is, you really don't have a lot of options in order for you to develop your preferences. I think everybody now just wants to protect themselves. That's number one priority. That's the priority of Egypt: protect itself from possibility of refugees, from so on and so forth, and trying to get as much of the situation as possible after you protect yourself.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I would like also to remind our audience to ask their questions in the chat, because of course we'll take questions from the audience. So please, everyone, don't forget to write and send your questions on the chat so they can be asked to our speaker later on. So thank you for that, Hussein. Regarding the future regime and the gesture regarding the Palestinians, we spoke before about the Camp David agreement. And as you know, when President Sadat came to the Knesset and addressed the Israeli parliament in 1977, he said that he did not come to Israel to sign a separate peace, but also to bring a solution to the Palestinian issue. as we know, he did end up signing a separate peace, and there was kind of a lip service in the Camp David agreement about the Palestinians. So my question is, cynically, why would be any different? Why would it be any different today? In other words, I don't assume that al-Sisi really believes that there is a real and comprehensive solution today to the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. So would he be also willing to satisfy himself with a model similar to the one that was agreed between Sadat and Begin back in 1979, kind of a symbolic gesture, knowing that it's not going to happen anyways?
I actually share your skepticism entirely, and I do believe that this is actually not just a possibility, but it could be actually what is happening now. The problem of Arab politics, the complete lack of transparency, it has its own language. You have to second guess yourself all the time. But I think actually the ones who have been actually somewhat clear on that have been the Saudis. So the Saudis, right after October 7th, the beginning of the military campaign, they said, okay, we're not going to have normalization with Israel unless there were steps for a Palestinian state. And they kept saying that for a few weeks. And then I think you had a change in rhetoric, or not a change, a clarification, which is, they said we primarily seek declarative steps. Like Israelis just need to say, okay, we're gonna give a Palestinian state, and then the Saudis can go ahead and sign normalization. I would say that's happening to a large degree with the maybe with Egypt and with the Emiratis themselves. I had a private conversation with a very intelligent Saudi pseudo official that's very close to the decision-making circles. And I remember we're talking about, and this is even before October 7th, about the normalization negotiations that were ongoing between Israelis and the Saudis. And basically, I remember him saying, the Israelis just need to say it. Why don't they just say it? And I didn't think I completely understood what he meant then. Just kind of, because he was talking about the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002, and the Israel just need to say it. And then after a while I thought about it, was like, maybe actually that's what he means. Israel just need to say it. I mean, that's actually in the context of how regional policy making and statesmanship, it's understandable. People just say things. But of course, I mean, it's very difficult for Israel. Israel is a democracy. Saying things come at an immediate political cost for anybody. But I do agree with you that likely what Arab states are looking for, including Egypt, are some Israeli symbolic steps and some easement for restrictions on Palestinians, some better living conditions. Ultimately, this actually goes very well with the strategic or geopolitical shift of Arab statesmanship since the Arab Spring. What you had is a new conception of regional politics, and that was led primarily by the GCC after the decline of your traditional powers. Your traditional powers in the Middle East that kind of ruled Arab politics for a very long time were Cairo, Damascus, Baghdad, intellectually somewhat Beirut. Now, Baghdad, Damascus, and Beirut under Iranian control, they are basically standing, and Cairo basically can feed itself. You had the power shift to the GCC. And you had the locus of Arab political official thinking that's moving towards the state providing economic welfare and basically economic prosperity. That's what the region needs in order to achieve some stability, some security, and legitimacy. And you do have this new conception of political legitimacy in the region that is based on performance. It's very obvious in Saudi Arabia. That's basically MBS's claim to legitimacy domestically and even internationally. Just his performance in liberalizing both Saudi economy and society. Same thing in the UAE. So I think that's it goes the idea of asking for some symbolic steps and also some working on making Palestinian conditions better. It actually goes very well into what these states have been doing with their own populations. Basically just allow them or help them get better economic conditions. And that's all the legitimacy that we need, that we currently are asking for.
Thank you. That's very interesting. There's still a point which is not entirely clear to me, Hussein. It's that you've talked about the competition within the Arab world and the Muslim world. What was called once during the Cold War, the Arab Cold War, with regimes divided, among other things, along the lines of pro-Soviet or pro-US support. And today, I mean, I understand when you say that al-Sisi is not interested in being involved in the hell of the Gaza Strip, one way or the other. But on the other hand, you know, if Israel were to decide theoretically after the war and after, let's say, we eliminate Sinwar and to just throw the keys and withdraw to the border, build a stronger fence or whatever, there would be a void, and theoretically that void could be filled by more pro-Iranian forces or pro-Turkish forces, and we know how Erdogan has been supportive of the Muslim Brotherhood and of Hamas. That wouldn't bother Egypt. I mean, they have a border with Gaza, so like wouldn't be. And again, there's also the issue of energy. I mean, Egypt. You said before, you know, Egypt kind of it's a bit like Jordan. They kind of enjoy the best of two worlds. They cooperate with Israel in security and economics, and we cooperate a lot with Egypt on natural gas, and we even have a regional competition with Turkey. And so you cooperate economically, and then you bash Israel in terms of public relations, because it's always, why not? You know, you always get more popular in public opinion. So it's like the best of two worlds. But on the other hand, at the end of the day, obviously al-Sisi wouldn't be interested in having a potential void in the Gaza Strip being filled by his worst adversaries or even enemies in the region.
I agree. It's completely you're completely right there. I just I'm always afraid of speculation. That will be really speculating in a lot of hypotheticals. But I would say that not just Egypt, but the way that a lot of Arab governments dealt with these issues is just bidding that it will be more painful for Israel than for them to let the conditions among the Palestinian security or otherwise deteriorate to that level. I don't know what would be the response of Egypt. I mean, that's one reason that they don't want to see Gazans on the other side of the borders in their own territory. Everybody remembers what happened to Lebanon after the Palestinian refugees left Jordan and went to Lebanon. Really, you talked about the beginning of really Middle Eastern brutal civil wars was the Lebanese Civil War in 1975. That was really the first time that we saw what later happened in Iraq and in Syria and Libya and in many other places. And the Palestinians were directly at the center of that. They actually kind of were they served as the igniter of this entire conflict. So I can't say how Egypt would treat with such a deal with such a hypothetical situation. But yes, so you're right to assume that they absolutely, and this is why before October 7th, they still prefer the presence of Hamas over that potential vacuum, especially as you have Iranian unceasing Iranian activities in the region. So I don't have an answer to your question. Yeah.
Thank you. So I also have another question. I mean, you're an expert on Egypt and the Arab world, and you've seen from very close the education, the spirit of the education in Egypt about the Jews, about Israel. And my question to you is, do you feel in the media, in public discourse, on social media, at least in Egypt, but also in the Arab world, some kind of embarrassment at what Hamas did on October 7th? Do you think that, do you see that at all or not? I mean, I'm sure, like, as you said, all the demonstrations, yeah, we support the Palestinians, etc., but a feel of embarrassment about what they actually did on October 7th?
Okay, so you have the public mass sentiments. The public mass sentiments are the way they are. I think everybody can guess exactly. What I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about elite sentiments. I want to say surprisingly, and this is actually a very positive development, that October 7th among the current Egyptian intellectual elites has been actually a polarizing event. And that's actually good news that it was a polarizing event. That means that there are people who were against it from the beginning. It actually served also served as a little bit of an opening for me to for some of Egyptian intellectuals to actually have me over in their own platforms. They have some podcasts, their papers, and try to discuss my ideas. Generally, people like me are pariahs and in these places. But it was, for example, the main catalyst, as you may imagine, since the Arab Spring, the main catalyst of all Egyptian intellectual labor, not just Egyptian intellectual labor, Arab intellectual labor in general, has been fighting Islamism, Islamic fundamentalism, and terrorism, right? That's rationally speaking, that became the real danger for all Arab societies. Remember that intellectuals are, by and large, in any society, are atheists, very secular. They have very modern lifestyle. They probably drink. They enjoy liberal freedoms in their own life. That's the nature of elites in almost all societies. The rise of Islamic fundamentalism to the terrifying levels that we've seen, of course, in Syria and Iraq and ISIS, but in Egypt itself, there was an actual Muslim Brotherhood government that came by probably the only free elections in Egypt's history. All of this was terrifying. So since 2013, the Egyptian elite, I'm talking about Egypt specifically, but the Arab elites in general, have been focusing all of their work on critique of religion, critique of religious fundamentalism, trying to combat the orthodox interpretations of Islamic sources. That has been the bread and butter of any Egyptian or Arab intellectual for the past decade or so. October 7th was a surprise because then they didn't know how to react. Is this because now we have one of those Islamic demons or Islamist demons that you're fighting who did this, but at the same time, it's against Israel, which is, the classical enemy of, the Arab societies and Arab progress and Arab economic development and so on. So it turned out to be an actual polarizing event. That is, you ended up having people who fell even strongly under anti-Islamist position, saying that no, Hamas is criminals, what they have done to the women, what they have done to this. And then you had other intellectuals who were or other elites who actually came for Hamas. And those intellectuals and elites themselves were anti-Islamists. So they've been anti-Islamist for the past 10 years. For example, Hamid Abdel Samad is actually, he's known in Germany, very well known in Germany. His bread and butter for the last 10 years has been just making making attack after attack against Islamic fundamentalism and the Muslim Brotherhood. He actually wrote one of the most famous books from the region on the Muslim Brotherhood called Islamic Fascism. And then he came after October 7th supporting Hamas. And actually, one of his close friends who just, found my work after this, and then he was talking to me, he was venting. He said, I was shocked. I had no idea. I thought he's saner than this. Then the story, the image that I want to say, it was a polarizing event. And that's really good. That really does open other questions about the nature of hostility to Israel and to Jews and anti-Semitism in the region. As more, I think, because of the conditions that we lived in the past 40 years, I think a lot of us forgot that this actually started with secular ideologies, progressive Arab forces, Arab nationalism, Arab socialism. I think a lot of us forgot that because of the rise of Islamism, and kind of we identify completely the hatred to Israel and to Jews with Islamic fundamentalism. But I think what happened on October 7th kind of brought memories or uncovered, especially with what happened in the international left in terms of also a very vocal support for Hamas. I think that opened a lot of old wounds in among the Arab elites, but it has been a polarizing event, and that means that there are voices that actually spoke against this. That's a very positive development, and hopefully it will only increase in the future.
Well, that's actually fascinating, and that's why it's so important that we hear it from you, because I personally was unaware of this. And so let's go now. Before we take the question, I would just like to make one last comment, because at the end of the day, the Islamist ideology of the ideology of the Brotherhood, in a way, kind of started in Egypt with Said Qutb,
Right.
you know, and who was executed by Nasser in 1966, precisely for claiming that modern Arab nationalism was a heresy,
Right.
and was the cause of the decline of the Arab world. And as we know, as fate would have it, as we say, shortly or a year after Qutb was executed by Nasser, Egypt was humiliated by Israel in the Six-Day War, which for many Muslims in Egypt was like a sign that he had been correct. So it's interesting to see how many years later you still have the same debates and the same ideas going around. And as I said, it's kind of a remindful of the centrality of Egypt in the Arab world. So thank you very much, Hussein, for those very illuminating comments. Let us take now questions from our audience. We have a first question from Jeff Donfeld. Jeff, please, the floor is yours.
The discussion you've just had, Emmanuel, really touched on my question in a sense. How did the Arab media report October 7th, and what was the impact of that reporting? Forget about the elite, you've just discussed that. What was the impact on the general citizenry in the streets of Egypt?
Oof. You know, I've been doing some consultancy for some media companies in the Middle East, trying to help them navigate through these issues. And it's just you touched probably on one of the biggest challenges. First of all, there is no free media in the Middle East, and there's no free Arab media or free Arab press. We're talking about, by and large, state-owned, state-run. You know, Al Jazeera, of course, is a big. It's kind of the biggest media company aware everybody, but you have Al Arabiya, which is the flagship Saudi counter to Al Jazeera. You have Sky News Arabic, which is the Emirati-owned, and you have various other networks that are associated and funded with various Arab regimes at all the time. If we go back to Nasser and Qutb and the beginning of all of this, the fight against Israel or anti-Zionism as the central principle around which supposedly Arab societies have to organize themselves morally and politically has always been meant, or at least started, as a unifying ideology. It was the best kind of way to unify this very disparate region that's coming out of Ottoman and colonial rule. You have various nations, various tribes, the best way to unify them. And that has been kind of it has been the nature of the Palestinian cause. I'm not talking about the Palestinian cause for the Palestinians and between the Palestinians and Israelis, but I'm talking about it regionally. It has always been this major, forceful, unifying voice, which practically, in terms of international relations, it's basically constraints. That is, it adds constraints on states and tries to control the foreign policy of different Arab countries. And that's why the Palestinian cause has always been this game between Middle Eastern states, including Iran right now. Basically, it's a way to control the behavior of other states by raising the banner of Palestine. This was part of the logic of October 7th in terms of trying to destroy the normalization negotiations of the Saudis. That's what the Iranians wanted. So basically using this tools of coercion inside the sentiments of pro-Palestine in order to coerce the Saudis away from Israel. So after October 7th happened, you had this explosion of the mass sentiments, which basically acted as constraints on the states, and most of the Arab media basically tried to pander is not even the word, but they basically had to go to the masses. I would not say so. Let's say if we go back to the 60s, Arab media, mass media was indoctrinated the masses. I think now the situation is, if you're not talking about Al Jazeera is indoctrinating, and the other Qatari, Al Jazeera is not the only Qatari network, it's the most famous one. I think the other Arab media outlets, the ones owned by the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Egyptians and so on, I think they were basically trying to entertain the mass sentiments. They were not indoctrinating, but they just can't say no. So you had reactions of trying to basically pander to the sentiment. Occasionally, very in calculated manner, try to push back on some aspects of it. So you have the Emiratis, for example, Sky News, Al Arabiya, just takes a general kind of the same kind of public announcement by the Emirates. They don't like what Israel is doing in Gaza. This is criminal, so on and so forth. But they will keep space to remind everybody that Hamas is criminal. That Hamas is the one that brought all of this on the Palestinian people. That Hamas is actually more to blame than Israel. So they try to do that. I think the Egyptians are trying to do it also on some limited scope. But other than that, I think they know that they can't challenge mass sentiments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hussein. The next question is from Lord Simon Reading. Please, Lord Reading, the floor is yours.
Could I ask Hussein to answer the question standing in my name? Thank you.
I do not have it.
Right. Okay, then I will I'll put it on the chat box, but I'll ask it right now. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So the question is this. Egypt's economy is in a bad state, as it was explained. But there are some considerable riches just around the corner in the East Med oil and gas fields. And I was just wondering whether the war has interrupted any joint ventures between Israel and Egypt, and whether Egypt are looking to continue to explore the concessions and to produce oil and gas to help its economy. And also, how would he think that Israel would react to that?
Thank you. I'm not aware. I'm sorry. I'm not well informed on this issue. Before there was the East Mediterranean Gas Forum that was started a while ago. I think they were advancing exactly on those lines. I'm not aware where those plans were at when October 7th happened, or where these stand today. But Egypt has a lot of energy needs, not just economic needs. Egypt actually, despite that they were a net exporter of natural gas till recently, and actually Israel used to purchase large quantities and a lot of its energy needs from Egypt. I think this actually got switched recently. Egypt now is a very large importer of natural gas, and there are growing Egyptian energy needs, and they actually buy a lot of their energy needs today from Israel. I do not think that the Egyptians would let the current situation jeopardize this, especially as we're entering spring and the summer, and you have the rising consumption rates due to air conditioning will require even more energy resources that Egypt is actually dependent on Israel to deliver. So that would be my guess, but I'm not familiar with any concrete details.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Tom Flash. Tom, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, Hussein, thank you so much. This is a wonderful. Wait, am I muted?
No, we hear you.
Okay, this is a wonderful presentation, very insightful. Jeff Donfeld asked a question I just want to follow up a little bit with, and that is, this is a very complicated situation with a lot of different agendas by the countries surrounding Israel and the Palestinians and the Hamas. My question is, though, is there a way, without coming out with spoken words, that recognizes Israel's right to exist, but that the optics from the actions and perhaps agreements lead to that type of relationship where the parties would be content without saying it, but acting that way, so that the optics are that there is some means and a manner in which the parties will be united, and perhaps they can figure out some kind of solution where they can live together without the express words of recognizing Israel's right to exist?
No, I think it's an excellent question, and I think even things were going to that direction, heading to that direction, starting from the Abraham Accords, continuing with the Biden-sponsored talks between Saudi Arabia and Israel. You definitely had you had a lot of Arab states felt freed from constraints to move ahead with relationships with Israel. Morocco, nobody hears about anything about Morocco, but I hear from my friends who are involved that actually the relationship is advancing quite well. Actually, the flights are still going on between Casablanca and Tel Aviv. So I hear from a lot of people that actually, especially with Morocco, things are going pretty well. I think there is after we're done with the aftermath of October 7th, I think there is a good chance that we will be able to go back, maybe even to a better position in which now more Arab states are more interested than ever in trying to getting this under control, given the ability of any flares up of tension or conflict to derail their big plans for economic development. Remember, Saudi Arabia is entering a major phase of economic development. They have the Saudi Vision 2030. The Emirates are the same thing. Egypt's going through economic difficulties. Jordan definitely as well. Not to mention, of course, the threat, the real Iranian threat that's especially on the neck of Jordan, very, very pronounced. I think it's the most vulnerable Arab country to Iran at the moment. So I think there is an understanding that it's in the best interest of everybody to actually get Israel more involved with them and to integrate the region. Now, they have their own agendas, as you said, and that's even one of the most frustrating things for me personally. I think Arab states compete in have a very bad history of that, of very unhealthy competition. And I don't know if they will be able to get over that in order to work together and to work with Israel to make things better. But I think all of this nice stuff that I said is dependent on very concrete things, and they primarily have to do with Washington. We will not be able to achieve any of that if Iran is not deterred. And the only country that can deter Iran is not Israel. It's not Saudi Arabia. It's not Egypt. And it's not them together. It's actually the United States. The United States can help them to deter Iran, but the United States must be involved. And a continuous presence or a continuous security commitments from the United States to the region. If the Saudis, I do believe, if the Saudis, we talked about China and I talked about the possibility of hedging with China and Russia. I think if from all my conversations with a lot of Arab officials and think from even reading between the lines of what they say, if there is a level of trust and confidence in the United States that has been that is restored, which is today is very questionable. I mean, you see what's been going on in the region. I think you might be able to go back to a situation in Arab states more reliable on the United States than they are on China, and then you have a more opening for more changes in the paradigm with the relationships with Israel. Iran is a big part of this today. I don't think there is a single Arab country as we speak who's interested in continuing anti-Zionism as some sort of an ideological mission or a political mission of their state in any way. I think all Arab states, maybe with the exception of Lebanon, but Lebanon is basically controlled by Iran and Syria. I think no Arab state actually cares about this issue anymore. The main issue right now is specifically Iran.
Can I just add one more, if you don't mind, please, time permitting?
Sure.
And that is, there's been a lot of progress. And you heard earlier mention about the delegations that ELNET is sending over to Israel. And we see a lot, in my opinion, we see a lot of activity from European Union countries with a presence in the region and also with the words in support of Israel. And my question, my hope is that it's recognized that we as ELNET and the arm in the United States, ELNET, is playing a role in hoping to help the peace process.
Yeah, that's
Yep, Tom.
definitely that would be the perfect conclusion, Tom, because
No.
as I said before, I am on my way downstairs to address the ELNET delegation that is here right now in Israel. And I can tell you that those interactions with European officials, elected officials, but also public figures coming to Israel nearly every week, thanks to ELNET, since the beginning of the war, gives them really an in-depth of understanding of how complex this conflict is. And, we've got very useful insights from Hussein about how Egypt perceives it. And it's such a complicated region. And very often, people come here from Europe with very simple ideas about the Middle East. And after 4 days here, they understand that it's much more complicated than it is. So I think just realizing that it's complicated in itself is a big achievement. But we do hope, and by the way, in the early June, ELNET is planning a conference in Berlin together with European countries and Arab countries to discuss the day after Gaza, to try and see how Europe can be involved in a constructive manner and not by just repeating the old formulas of the past, but by having a more realistic approach to the region, a more pragmatic approach to the region, a more constructive approach to the region. And this we must do in full partnership with our neighbors. And Egypt is our most important neighbor. It's as I said before, the biggest Arab country, the first Arab country with which Israel signed a peace agreement, which has been holding despite the ups and downs of the last decades. And I think that one of the reasons why ELNET is so important is precisely because Europe is a key player. It is Europe that shaped the Middle East after World War I. And it is Europe today that still plays a very important role. You reminded us of the military presence of Britain and France in the Persian Gulf, in the East Med, 2 permanent members of the Security Council with a veto power, which is why we have to continue to invest our efforts in Europe. So with this, I would like really to thank you again, Hussein. It was a pleasure to see you online, and I hope to see you very soon, physically, either in the US or here in Israel. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to share with us your very, very enlightening insights. Thank you, everybody. And with this, maybe David, do you want to conclude, David Siegel, or should we just...
No, I think Emmanuel, you said it very, very well. I think everyone understands the role of Europe, and we'll continue talking about it. Hussein, it was wonderful hearing your insights, and we hope to see you in further programs of ours. It's very important that your voice be heard by European leaders, and that's the business that we're in. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Emmanuel. It's a great conversation. Be well.